So the biggest misconception about Buddhism in the West is that Buddhism is a self-improvement kind of religion, that it gets you to unlock your full self. But the actual Buddhist philosophy teaches us to abandon ourselves, teaches us that the soul is not a permanent creation, unlike Catholicism.
I've heard many people from other countries say that they like the Buddhist lifestyle, where it's everything is peaceful, right?
Right, and that is actually a misconception because people think Buddhism is a self-improvement. You go for a retreat, you're improving your life, but that is actually wrong. Buddhism teaches us to abandon our soul because our soul is not permanent. Buddhism teaches Patrick is now just a character. And when we achieve Nirvana and get out of this circle, we will look back at my former character, Patrick, as like how you think of you in the past. Let's say you do a school play as an actor. You don't think of your decisions as drastically anymore because it is all just an act and you are not in that character anymore. So when you eventually achieve Nirvana and die, Buddhist philosophy teaches that you will think of yourself as just a character, not anything significant. Just you playing in a character and you suddenly have an ultimate awakening and you're not that character anymore.
Oh, Patrick, for us as Catholics, we know that heaven is a paradise where us Christians go after we die. But for y'all, what is Nirvana like?
Well, in my former religion, because I was a former Buddhist, Nirvana was not even a place, it's just a state of mind. So Buddhist philosophy teaches that in life, you do something to have a positive outcome or a negative outcome. You take care of your family and wife because they make you happy. You go out and make money because you need it to survive. But Buddhism actually teaches, unlike Catholicism, your wife and children are not a gift of God. There's no God in Buddhism. Buddhism teaches that your wife and your children are just attachments that you have to let go. So Buddhism, the entire religion, teaches you to let go. Unlike Catholicism, which teaches that your wife, your children are a gift from God and you are to take care of them, to nurture them and raise them in a godly way. Buddhism drops all of that. It teaches us that they are just something that holds you back. They are an attachment. And we are just to let them go, like how we let go luxury cars and luxury houses.
If there is no God in Buddhism, then why do people offer things to statues of the Buddha?
Well, this is actually a reflection on Protestantism, and here's why. Buddhism, the original philosophy taught by the Buddha, is there is no God. But because of certain cultures, they add other religions into Buddhism. So all of these gods that you're seeing in mostly Asian culture, those are added by the culture because there is actually no God in the original teachings of the Buddha. These deities are added on to the religion of Buddhism in this specific culture. But if you go to the old Buddhist culture, there is no God because Buddhism teaches that there is no God. But because of all of these countries and adding on to the Buddhist religion, there are so many deities. And the reason why I say it's like Protestantism, Christianity started with one church, the Holy Catholic Church. But Martin Luther decided he wanted to break away from the Catholic Church, and it led to over 45,000 different divisions. And that is why there are so many radical teachings within Christianity today, much like Buddhism.
But you've told me before about folk Buddhism. What are the key differences between folk Buddhism and the Buddhism which is the way the Western
teaching?
culture thinks? The original teaching, yes.
The difference is like me asking you, Benedict, why is the difference between Catholic and Protestantism? Well, it's very simple. Catholicism is the original Christian religion and Protestantism just broke away from it. They are our separated brothers and sisters, right?
Yes.
Well, it's very similar in Buddhism. The original Buddhist teachings emphasize that there is no God. That is what set Buddhism apart from all these Abrahamic religion. But because of certain cultures, they added deities to Buddhism, especially in Thailand, in Malaysia, and in certain Asian countries. They added deities like the sky god, the ground god, or the snake. There is a snake temple. They added on to the teachings of the Buddha. which is not meant to be there. So all of these gods are actually a blend of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism. So let's take Malaysia for an example. Malaysia is a very diverse landscape in terms of the Buddhist religion. Malaysian Buddhism combines all three: Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism.
But what are the key differences between Buddhism and, let's say, Taoism?
So the difference between Buddhism and Taoism is that Buddhism teaches that the soul is just a character that we play, and that when we die, all of it does not matter. But Taoism teaches us to live in harmony with nature, teaches us to follow the natural flow.
Now, instead of me swaying away to Taoism, I think we should go back to Buddhism, eh, Patrick?
Yes, I think we should. But it's okay to ask questions though, because a lot of Westerners do not know this about Buddhism. So the Buddhism in the West and the Buddhism in Asian culture is actually very different. Because you see Buddhism in Western cultures, you see it as something to improve yourself. Some people go on retreat to meditate, and there is no Buddhist deities in the West. But in Asian cultures, there are many Buddhist deities because they combine with Taoism and Hinduism. They didn't have a formal split like Protestants and Catholicism did, because there was no Pope, so there was no one to say that the Buddhists in Asian are committing heresies. Buddhism is just adapting to the culture, so different countries have different philosophy of Buddhism.
Patrick, it would have made sense for Buddhism to adapt around with the cultures, right? Because it was non-theistic.
Yes, because there was no central beliefs like us. We believe in Jesus Christ. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And we cannot develop other gods because that would contradict our beliefs. Even Protestants know that. But in Buddhism, because Buddhism is just a way of life, it preaches that there is no God originally. It is very easy to adapt to other cultures because the way of life can also include their deities.
Since for us as Catholics in heaven, we can walk around, we can talk, we can just enjoy the best times of our lives. But in Nirvana, for Buddhists, what do they do there?
Well, after you escaped the cycle of reincarnation and eventually achieved Nirvana, after you die, Buddhism teaches that there is no doing, like I have already stated, because in life you do things for something in Buddhism, like you take care of your family for happiness, you make money to survive. But in Nirvana, because you have already lost your personality, like I am not Patrick anymore in Nirvana, I have dropped that, that is just a school play, that is just an acting gig, then there is no point to do anything because there is no self anymore, there is no soul anymore.
So would you just call it a void of nothingness?
Well, Buddhists would not call it a void of nothingness. It is common for us Catholics to believe that if we work so hard to get out of the cycle of reincarnation, are we just achieving nothing? And Buddhist philosophy states that that is not true. When you are in Nirvana, when you have died, you will be awakened. It's like you meditating, but you are the most awakened form of yourself ever. And you're not even yourself, sorry, because Buddhism teaches that the soul is not permanent. So think of it like this. Buddhism teaches that the soul is a drop of water trapped in a cage. In life, your goal is to get out of the cage. And once you have gotten out of that cage, the drop of water dropped into the ocean. It is very hard to comprehend what Buddhism actually teaches. Even through studying for this video about Buddhism, I cannot understand it completely. Because once you die, if you are not even present anymore, if I'm not Patrick, you are not Benedict, there is no doing, because there is no point on doing anything, because there is no yourself anymore. Then what is the point of achieving Nirvana?
Wow. But for you, Patrick, the difference between studying Buddhism and studying Catholicism, what was the main challenge between the two?
Well, studying Catholicism is actually easier because there is just one God and you study His word, you study the church that He instituted. But in Buddhism, it is actually very messed up because unlike the Bible, which was written around 30 to 70 years after the death of Jesus, after the death of the Buddha, the Tripitaka, which is the book that writes down the teachings of Buddha, was actually passed down through oral traditions, and it was written centuries after the death of Buddha, around 200 to 300 years after his death.
Wow. So there could have been things that were changed over time.
Right, that could have been. The writings about the life of Buddha in the Tripitaka is like the writing about Socrates. We don't know everything about Socrates, and we also don't know everything about Buddhism, but passed down through oral traditions, we know a little bit, we know his teachings. And what set the religion of Buddhism apart from all the other religions is this. In Christianity, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And if you don't follow Jesus, you are eternally condemned. Obviously, excluding invincible ignorance. Obviously, God is very merciful. If you know about the church and you know that it is true, but you chose to not follow it, then you chose separation from God. And separation from God equals to hell. But Buddhism teaches the way of life, and it states this. Don't believe me of my words. I am not God. Follow my teachings and see the results for yourself.
That was written by the Buddha.
Well, it was not written by the Buddha. The Buddha didn't write anything down. The Buddha wasn't God. He cannot have inspired anything. Let's say the Buddha taught you the way of life, and you taught your children taught your children for generations, and around 200 to 300 years after, you decide to write a book about his teachings, and that is where the Tripitaka comes from. Actually, in my opinion, the life of Buddha is actually highly inaccurate, because we don't have the original writings like we did for Jesus, because the people who wrote the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, actually personally knew Jesus. Even for Paul, he personally saw Jesus. And for the people who wrote the Tripitaka, they didn't personally see the Buddha.
It would have literally been generations and generations. Then only the Tripitaka was written.
My numbers back then was actually not accurate. The Tripitaka wasn't written 200 to 300 years after. Upon doing more research, it was actually written 400 to 450 years after the death of the Buddha. So it's very different from Catholicism.
Wow. So really, that proves the theory even more, that over time things would have changed.
Don't you
The
think
same
that
thing
after
written
400 to 450 years, the teachings of Buddha would have stayed exactly the same? It wouldn't. Because
I think
Buddhism
that's
does not have a
physically
pope.
impossible.
Yes, because Buddhism does not have a pope. And it's like the Protestant Bible. Do you think that the Protestant Bible is the same as the Jehovah's Witness books? Right, the books of Mormons? Does it align completely with the Bible? No, it doesn't, because it changes, because there is no central authority like the Pope. So think of it like this. In Buddhism, it was written 4 centuries after. The teachings would have been changed one way or another. It wouldn't have stayed completely the same. So when I converted to Catholicism, it is very different, because God teaches us that our bodies are a temple of God, and heaven is the best form of Patrick. Does that make sense? Because on earth here, we are still filled with sin, we are still sinful men, but in heaven, our sins are all forgiven, they are all wiped clean, and we no longer sin in heaven. So Patrick in heaven is the most perfect form of Patrick ever. That is what God does. He works through us to make us the best version of ourselves. But Buddhism contradicts that. Buddhism does not make you the best version of yourself. Buddhism teaches that, well, you are not important, you are just an attachment, throw it away, and when you die, you will just think of it as an acting gig.
But in reality, in Catholicism, when you die, when you go to heaven, you're a new version of yourself. You're a new pure version of yourself, right?
Well, I wouldn't say new version of yourself. I would say you are the best and most improved version of yourself. Because I still retain my identity. Patrick is still Patrick in heaven, and Benedict is still Benedict. But all of the bad attitudes that we have, all of the bad addictions that we have, all of the bad sinful nature that we have, are all taken away, because we have seen how beautiful heaven is and how beautiful God is, that we wouldn't even want to sin anymore. So in heaven is the most perfect form of Patrick and Benedict. It is not losing our identity, it is not changing us into a new being, but it is improving us to the best version of ourselves. I am lucky enough that I'm not super devoted to the Buddhist religion when I was a Buddhist. I converted to Catholicism and I learned about the Catholic Church. And it took me some time, obviously, but I can imagine for someone that is super devout, let's say a Buddhist monk, and they got a chance to study Catholicism in depth. In Buddhist philosophy, they might think themselves to be just an attachment. They might think themselves to be something that hold them back. Don't you think Buddhism yourself is holding you back? Because the soul is not permanent, so we should not hold on to the soul. So for a Buddhist monk converting to Catholicism, they might have a realization that my soul is not something that holds me back. My soul is not just a character. I am made in the likeness and image of God, and I should protect myself so that God can make me into a better person and the best version of myself in heaven. I feel like for a Buddhist monk converting to Catholicism, they might feel an overwhelming flowing of love for someone dying for their sins.
Think of a family man, a father that had just converted to Catholicism from Buddhism. In Catholicism, his wife and kids are gifts from God. But in Buddhism, they are merely just attachments. Think on how he must feel.
I think it will be a profound realization because in the past he think, oh, my wife and my children, they are just attachments. Let me let go of all of them and go to the monastery. But in Catholicism, God says that we should take care of our wife. We should be the man of the house. We should be the one taking them to church to glorify God, to make them better every single day, to take care of our children and to raise them in the way of the Lord. I hope you guys enjoy watching today's video, and if you did, please leave a like, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe. We really appreciate all your support.